Right, so here is your recap of the April 28th Greeley City Council work session. I'm going to just hit the biggest things. So they went over the first quarter budget and audit review. It actually looks like the city is in better position than they expected to be for this first quarter, which is promising. They said sales tax was down, but overall, it's a decent looking picture, if you ignore the fact that we have a deficit. But in terms of what they were expecting, we actually have more cash on hand. So that's a good thing. They talked about the East Greeley Subarea Plan and shared result from the surveys that were done and the meetings with community members, and then proposed some different ideas. One of the things that really stood out is as the city went through, one of the things they said that came up very high in the survey results was agricultural conservation. However, when Councilmember Olson spoke after the presentation, he shared concerns that if we do agricultural conservation, that will mean that people can't later decide that they want to develop, and that there are already talks with the developers, though he wasn't going to discuss more about that. He also, to all of the ideas of how to improve East Greeley, his first response was, ching, 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 all I hear is money. So what's going to be the draw? And he kept pushing this, like, what's going to be the draw? What's going to bring people in to make this worth it, to make these changes something that we can do? So we'll see where that goes. Olson also seemed to be very bothered by the fact that they had put down on paper some of these preliminary plans, possibilities, because as soon as it's on paper, then that means that's what everyone is going to expect. Really throughout the meeting, Olson seemed pretty combative towards the city, cutting them off, interrupting them, especially as we get into the West Greeley financial update. So as we go into that, the cost for the project has already gone up by, from the high end, I think it was about 50 million, but from the reduced that they had looked at, we're looking at more like 100 million. There is about $127 million that they still need to find somewhere. The big theme of Olson, Hall, and McDonald talking to the city was that it is the city's fault for not communicating well. Olson repeatedly interrupted the presentation, well, not the presentation, but the presenters, as they were addressing his questions, seeming to try to lead them in questions, and then once they would explain, go, well, how is anyone supposed to understand that? This continues to really bother me because he continues to put the responsibility elsewhere, because the reality is, him and Hall said he understands 99% of it, except neither one of them have I seen really make an effort to make sure that citizens can understand what they're talking about. And so now they're putting it on the city, that if only the city would have explained things better and would come to these meetings and explain in a way that everyone could understand, that then there wouldn't be an issue. Olson also seemed to lead them in answering the question, trying to get them to say that because of the special election, it is harder to borrow the money, and therefore that's the reason that we owe more. Again, skirting responsibility of the fact that they could have at any point paused. They could have waited to spend COP money. They could have made a lot of different decisions, but again, putting it on city and putting it on residents. So they did talk about potential moving forward, what that looks like. One thing that was interesting is the representatives from the city talked about the GID being part of what paid off COP money. And Olson himself said he's never heard that. So I'm not quite sure where that came from. They talked about a lot of different models and ultimately came down to, well, that'll be the Citizen Oversight Committee's job, is to take all of this information and make it digestible for the rest of the community. That the citizen volunteer board should then make sure that residents can understand what's coming out. As you can tell, I'm not super impressed with that. There was also a very offhand comment thrown out there by Olson about how the data center could help the GID, which could then help fund these things, which again, those conflicting messages of, is the data center something we're talking about and working with, or is that something that's a just in case? So found that interesting. The city had also tried to state that about what the debt service and stuff would look like. And Olson had said, well, but it says that, by year 9, we'll start being able to pay that. And so in 20 years, like, everything is paid off. And the city had said, no. In 20 years, we'll be able to pay off annually what we have, but that won't be to backdate all the funds that we put up front. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I think the other really big thing that came up in this is they were talking about Ward 1 and the appointment to the council. So they made some decisions. They will be doing interviews at the May 5th city council meeting. They're going to start at 5 p.m. to do that. They're going to do panel interviews. So there were 15 people who submitted applications. 13 of those were valid. 1 was too late and 1 wasn't in Ward 1. Of those 13, apparently the city council is now going to do a rating system like they had done with the Citizen Oversight Committee, and they will only be interviewing the top 5 applicants by score. So there are going to be 8 applicants that we won't know anything about, and we won't get to see them speak. When they do the interviews on May 5th, there will be 2 questions that everyone gets, and then everyone on council is allowed to ask 1 follow-up question of every applicant. I feel like Councilmember DeBeauty brought up a really good point as she had kind of called out the council in the way saying, well, what are we looking for? Are we looking for someone who's like Tommy and who's the replacement? Are we looking for someone who has a career in politics? What is it exactly that we are looking to fill this? And I can tell you resoundingly, what I have heard from residents who have spoken is they want what we voted for. They want someone who will come in and who will fight the way that Tommy Butler did and who stands for and by many of the things that he does. Not someone that council decides they'd like to work with, not someone that council thinks will make their job easier or will agree with them, but someone who looks like what we voted for. So I would really, really encourage people to attend the May 5th meeting on Tuesday. I think this will be a pretty big one, and it will be yet another opportunity that we can see whether or not council is actually listening to us or not. Will they choose someone who represents what we have voted for in the past, what we said we wanted by electing Tommy Butler, or will they choose to disregard that? So hope that helps. I'll be working on the Citizen Oversight Committee recap. Hopefully I will get that watched tomorrow morning. It's been a bit of a crazy week and trying to fit this into everything else. But if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks, y'all.